Sunday, we typically go a little bit longer, but we try not to go super long because right now, while we are sitting up here in a beautiful, calm silence, there is absolute madness happening in the infant nursery. I heard the screams, so I closed the doors. I just turned around and I come up. Okay? But they're doing great. I'm so thankful for the women that serve in our infant nursery and the men and women that serve in the toddler nursery. It's a huge blessing, and it actually teaches us some really good things about following Jesus when we go and go help love on people that have absolutely nothing to offer us except for dirty diapers. Okay? We're going to go through a lot of the book of Mark today. We're not just going to get close to finishing the end of chapter 6. We're going to speed right into chapter 8 today. So grab your Bible and turn to Mark chapter 6. We are going to skip over chapter 7. We're going to leave that for Pastor Chad in a little bit, but you're going to want to have a Bible either in your hands or in your neighbor's hands so you can lean over and see this for yourself. If you're in the overflow, there are Bibles in between the sections there. You can grab one. Mark chapter 6 is where we're going. But to start off this week, do you remember what it was like? I remember when my mom and dad would go away on vacation or something, or they'd go on a missions trip. When I was a kid, they went to Guatemala. I remember anytime they went home from a big trip, I would run to the door. I was the oldest of 4 kids. And what is the first thing out of a child's mouth when mom and dad get back from somewhere? What is it? What did you bring me? Right? What did you bring me? And you run up and you're like, Dad, what did you bring me? And Dad makes a dad joke. He's like, I brought you me. Right? And you're like, yeah, good one, Dad. What did you really bring? And you go and you watch him unpack his suitcase, and eventually you find that little trinket or something. I remember my dad brought me back a goat skin water bottle from Guatemala. It was really cool. I think it's still at my house. It's a little solid. It's a little cracked. Definitely need a new skin on it. But then I had my own kids. And for a while, I was in the financial world where I was traveling from conferences and different training things, going away to seminars. Anytime I'd come back, my kids would come to the door, and what would they ask? What did you bring me? What did you bring us, Dad? What did you bring us? And I would say, I brought you me. And my kids would say, and that is enough, Father. And then we would gather for prayer. We would gather for prayer. Right now, I'm just kidding. My kids are the same as me in almost every area of life. I'm being punished for what I did to my parents in those situations. But our faith journey is kind of like the same thing. We're like, what do I get now? What do I get, Father? What do you have for me? What can I get from you today? And that's the way we kind of live our life in the early stages of our faith, in our early stages of following Jesus Christ. But it is impossible to have an authentic relationship with someone from whom you're always trying to get something. Think about that for a second. It's impossible to have an authentic relationship with someone from whom you're always trying to get something. You're expecting something. You know those people in your life. They always just want. Take. They don't want it to be a two-way street. They're just more. It's hard to have an authentic relationship with someone like that. There's always an agenda. It's always a dance. You're trying to figure out, what do they want this time? Why are they being nice to me right now? What do they really, really want? Well, here in Mark, the author is going to teach us here that God actually gave us everything that we need in the person of Jesus Christ. Absolutely everything that we need. In fact, we know that because Jesus showed up on the scene, because he died and rose again, because he went through all of that stuff, we can have what's actually described in Philippians as, I don't know if it's clicking, there we go. We can have the peace of God which transcends all understanding through Jesus Christ. You can have that kind of peace today. You really can in the person of Jesus Christ. You might have come here this morning, and the one thing you want more than anything else, if you could sell all your possessions, you might do it if you could just find peace in the storm that you're going through right now. In Jesus, we find out that it's okay to not be okay in this life. In Jesus, we find out that all the things, all the pain, it just seems so senseless that we can have peace as we go through that pain. Just as John the Baptist did as we learned last week, before his head was taken off. For those years while he sat in prison, he had his focus and his hope in the right place. But don't take my word for it. Let's look at the text. Mark chapter 6, let's start in verse 30 together. It says this in verse 30, the apostles returned to Jesus. Now this is after earlier in chapter 6, Jesus had sent out the disciples to heal and to do miracles and to cast out demons. So they returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while, for many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat." Now remember, they've also got the fresh news that John the Baptist has been killed. He's been executed. That wears on you when troubling things like that happen. It can be emotionally unstabilizing. Jesus is like, guys, let's go escape from this for a little bit and just have peace. Let's have quiet. Have you ever been at that point where you just need some peace and quiet? Probably daily. There's a moment where you're just like, this is too much. I just wish everyone would be quiet for a second. You go and you try to hide yourself in the bathroom for a little bit, and you lock the door, and then the pounding of those little hands. Mom, are you in there? I looked everywhere. I just want some peace. Right? So what do? Verse 32. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. So Jesus leaves Jerusalem. He heads north back to Galilee. He gets to the sea. He gets in a boat, and he goes northward to the northernmost shore. What he's hunting for is isolation at this point for he and the disciples. He makes sure it's a remote location. But look what happens in verse 33. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. Whoa, wow. So Jesus and his disciples, as they're like leaving the shore, people are spotting the boat from the shore. They're like, it's the Miracle Man. It's kind of like the ice cream truck, right? Kids in the neighborhood, it doesn't happen very much anymore. I wish it did. But the ice cream truck music goes, and kids start coming from all the houses, gathering around, right? Chasing the ice cream truck down the road. This is what's happening with Jesus. In their minds, the people are seeing a mobile magic show. It's like Cirque du Soleil. And what port will he land in? It doesn't matter. Keep running. Tell the people along the way. And when they get to shore, the crowd has already made it there. So look at verse 34. It says, when he went to shore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. The crowd had swelled. But when you think about what the timing was, you can't find it here in the book of Mark, but if you look over at the Gospel of John, we find out that Passover is about to happen. This is a very important time involving sheep, involving lambs. Jesus sees these people, and he sees them as sheep without a shepherd, right? Passover was a time celebrating Egypt, the Israelites exiting Egypt under the oversight of Moses at the time, and eventually entering the promised land under the leadership of Joshua. So there's a very important time of celebration coming. When Jesus looked up, he saw the great crowd that was coming towards him, the one he had been trying to escape. He knew that there was only one reaction for him to have to these people, these masses, and that was compassion. But he knew that people weren't coming for the right reasons. They weren't coming because Jesus was Jesus. They were coming because Jesus did miracles. They were coming looking for another sign, not the one who was making the signs. They just wanted to see more. Continuing in verse 34. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him. So the disciples come to him. And they said, this is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered them, you give them something to eat. Whoa. All right, Jesus. You give them something to eat. That's what Jesus said to them. And they said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? We know that from John chapter 6, where the feeding of the 5,000 is in that gospel, that 200 denarii is not going to be enough to feed these people. In fact, it says people would only be able to get maybe even the tiniest little bite if they spent all that money. But they're definitely not going to be filled. Now, it is late. Now, we've got some bakers here in the audience today. Typically, you bake your bread in the morning. At least the bakery around the corner from me, by 4 o'clock, they're already shut down. You can't even go and get bread anymore. People go to get fresh baked bread in the morning. There was nowhere for these people to eat. Chances are they were going hungry at this point in the evening if they couldn't be fed by Jesus and by the disciples. So look back at verse 38 now. It says, and he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when he found out, they said, 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. Now, sometimes when we think of the kid maybe having 5 loaves and 2 fish, you might imagine a loaf like this, right? But no kid is bringing like 5 of these for lunch in a lunchbox, right? Well, I got a hold of the most adorable lunchbox this week from Mr. Morris Watson. So, Sharon, thank you for letting me have this. Bobby says he's going to use it as a school lunchbox this year. I said, it's great because it doubles. You hold your food. It's also a weapon. And the school will let you take it, right? So, it's Morris Watson. This was the lunchbox that Morris used for his lunch while he was working in Port Elgin. Is that right, Sharon? So this is a pretty special lunchbox. But this is probably more what it was like, what it looked like, right? It was probably five little loaves, little cakes of bread like that, and 2 fish. Now, sometimes I do bring raw fish into sermons, but not today. It stunk too bad last time, and Ralph was really mad at me for a few weeks that we were around here. But then we got a can of sardines, which is probably the equivalent to what maybe these 2 fish were like. Mike Walsh, these are for you afterwards. I know he likes these. I got the ones in olive oil for you, okay? He'll eat them right out of the can. It's amazing. You don't see it in this particular gospel, but it was actually a boy who offered up his lunch. He said, Jesus, I don't have much, but here, take my lunch. 5 little cakes of bread and 2 fish. It's pretty small, it's pretty piddly, but, and we're not going to focus on this morning, but remember this, little is much when God is in it. Remember that phrase, okay? Little is much when God is in it. The widow's mites, those were big time. 2 pennies to rub together. Give them to the Lord. He's going to do big things. And that's what he does here. So look back at the text. It says, and taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, and he said a blessing, and he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. So you can just imagine this. Jesus takes these loaves in his hands. He's already got the people sitting in groups of 50 and 100 all over this grassy hillside. And Jesus holds up the bread, and he starts to pray, oh, Father, bless this bread as we eat it together. And you can imagine what the disciples are doing. They're not closing their eyes. They're peeking at each other. They're like, what is happening? This is so embarrassing. It was your idea to follow him. What is going on right now? They have no idea what Jesus is about to do, but he prays in expectation that his Father is about to do something. And it's absolutely incredible what unfolds after that. Look at this. It says, and he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they ate, and they were satisfied, and they took 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of fish, and those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. That was just the men. The reason 5,000 is mentioned here, because 5,000 is the size of a Roman legion. So if Jesus at this moment had decided that he wanted to march on Jerusalem, if he wanted to march against Rome, he could have done it. He had the manpower right there. But this is just the men, including women and children. There could have been 20,000 people sitting there. This is no small miracle. In John 6:14, we read, when the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who has come into the world. Now remember, under Moses, the wandering Israelites, they got excited when they got what they needed every day. The manna was being provided. But if you took more manna than you needed, what happened to the manna by the next day? What? Yeah, stunk. It got worms and maggots in it, that kind of stuff. Under Moses, the people got exactly what they needed for the day. Jesus provided so much more than enough. They went around and they collected baskets full of what had just filled a little boy's lunchbox. This is absolutely incredible. And for just a moment, the people turned their attention away from the sign, away from the fact that they were getting this huge meal, and they looked at the one that the signs were pointing to, the promised Messiah. The better Moses, the better Joshua was here in their midst, and they remembered it for just a minute. Remember, Moses was one who God used to help free the people from slavery, and at that point, people were starting to line up these prophecies in their mind, and Jesus knew it. They're like, Moses led our people, our ancestors, out of slavery in Egypt, and now this man, he could be the promised prophet who is going to lead us into a better place, into a promised land where we can live. Can you believe it? Well, listen to this, verse 45. Immediately, we're going to take it way beyond the story of the 5,000 here. Immediately, he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. So he sent the 12 across the lake because he knew what was happening in the mass of people right there. He knew that eventually he was going to go to Jerusalem. But Jesus knew he was not supposed to go to Jerusalem as a conquering king. He was going to go there as lamb to the slaughter. And the time hadn't come yet. So he sends the disciples away. Get out of here, guys. And he goes away and he prays by himself. Look at verse 47. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully when the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought he was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said to them, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And he got in the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astonished. For they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. They still didn't get what he was doing, feeding all these people. They didn't understand what he was trying to teach them. Now, flip over to Mark chapter 8, verse 1. Because the story continues. And it all culminates in Mark chapter 8. So Mark chapter 8, verse 1 says, "In those days, when again a great crowd gathered, and they had nothing to eat, he called his disciples to him and said to them, 'I have compassion on the crowd because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from far away.' And his disciples answered him, 'How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place?'" You see, this is a different story. There's 4,000 people involved now instead of 5,000. But they're still asking the question, "How are you going to feed these people, Jesus? We have no bread in this desolate place." Look at verse 5. And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have?" They said, 7. And he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground again. And he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And they set them before the crowd. And they had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said that these also should be set before them. And they ate and were satisfied. And they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. And there were about 4,000 people, and he sent them away. And immediately he got in the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. Now look at verse 11. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. So they're still looking for signs. The Pharisees don't get it. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." And he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. Now in verse 14, this is the disciples now. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only 1 loaf with them in the boat. And Jesus, he starts to talk to them again about something that's really important. He cautioned them, saying, "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And what did the disciples do? It says right there in verse 16, "And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread." And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Or are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves of the 5,000? How many baskets full of pieces did you take up? They said to him, 12. And 7 for the 4,000. How many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? They said to him, 7. And he said to them, do you not understand? Don't you get it? Don't you get it? The point that Jesus is trying to make here to them and to us today is that as long as we're looking for an it in our relationship with Jesus, we will never be satisfied. As long as we're looking for a thing in our relationship with Jesus, we will never be satisfied. Until we are fully willing to accept him as the bread of life, as he declares himself, we can never be satisfied. As long as we're always looking for a gift, instead of looking at the giver, we will never be satisfied. He's like, all you can think about is lunch, and you are sitting with the creator of everything. I am the master of every molecule. I am the bread of life. Don't you understand who you're sitting with? You've forgotten what I did yesterday. You've forgotten what I did the day before. Don't you remember how I provided for you? I'll do that again. Now I've got a question for you. Have you ever sat with someone who's really important in this world's eyes? Anybody here ever sat with a famous person? Raise your hand. Maybe I'll take one or two. Have you ever sat with a famous person, been able to sit down with someone? Ernie, who? Frank Mahovlich. Okay. Yes. Incredible hockey player. Was he Chicago Blackhawks? I don't know. Anyway, you don't have to remember right now. So Frank Mahovlich, important hockey player. One time, I had the opportunity, my dad took me to meet this guy. That's me on the front page of the Evening Times Globe, St. John, New Brunswick, 1992. After the Olympics, this guy came back, Mark Lackey, Mark Lowry's our old pastor. Mark Lackey, Pastor Mark, he was healthy enough to have won something at the Olympics. But this guy won a silver medal in speed skating. My dad took me to meet him. That's little me right there. Wow. At 9 years old, staring up at an Olympic hero. I was awestruck, and he let me wear his medal and everything. It was a really, really cool experience. Then my dad had a really cool opportunity to take me to meet somebody else back when I was a kid. I don't have a picture of us together, but and you might not be a fan, actually, okay? But Jean Chrétien came to our hometown, and my dad's company had like a little meet and greet, so I got to eat bran muffins with the Prime Minister of Canada. I don't remember anything that was said, but he seemed pretty nice in that little meet and greet session. But imagine for a second that you had a chance to sit down with someone who was influential in every corner of the globe from human standards. Let's say that the now deceased Steve Jobs gave you an opportunity before he passed away to sit down and maybe have lunch with him. So you're sitting across from the guy who created the iPhone that has revolutionized the way we communicate with one another, okay? Imagine you're sitting there with him at lunchtime. Imagine I'm sitting there and I just, hey Steve, it's great that we could get together today. Oh, Tim, yeah, it's super. I've got about an hour. What would you like to do? How silly would it be if I said, Steve, I know like you've really influenced the way we communicate with one another, technology. You just changed the way we do things. So I was wondering, my wife broke her iPhone screen last week. Would you be able to get this? Could you fix this for me? Could you fix the iPhone screen? I know you've probably got, tens of thousands of other employees that could take care of this, but would you mind fixing this iPhone screen for me? I'm gonna go grab lunch over there. If you could have it done by the time the hour's up, that would be super. How silly would that be, right? What would you do if you got to sit with someone who had made such an influence in this world? What would you do? Think about it for a second. You know what we ought to do? Ask questions, right? how did you think of that? How did you come up with this? How do you manage all these people? You would want to pick their brain for all the knowledge you could. You wouldn't ask for silly, trivial little things like, hey, fix my phone. These people who were in the crowd, these people, the disciples who were in the boat with Jesus, they didn't really realize who it was. Now, they might have had an excuse, because to this point, Jesus was just a guy who said he was going to save them, right? Who said he would die and raise himself up to life again. We have no excuse. In hindsight, we look back, we know that Jesus is who he says he is. He is everything. So what is this Christianity thing to you? Is it just food? Do you just come to be entertained? Is it something where well, Jesus didn't let my experience at church go the way that I wanted to, so forget him. I'm going to go try something new. Are we always waiting for Jesus to perform that next miracle in our life to show himself again so that we can fully appreciate who he is? Or are we at the point where we can say, Jesus, you have already proven yourself over and over again. So as I go through this storm, as I sit here and it seems like there's too much month and not enough money, can I trust you in this situation? Are we at the point where we can say, Jesus, you are who you always have been. I can count on you. I don't need you to show me another trick to prove it. I believe you are who you say you are. That's the question that I'll leave us with today. Do you believe that he really is the bread of life? Or are you looking for bread in other places in this world? Is he your all, or is he just your some? Is he that little biscuit that you just have to come and get from him all the time before you really trust him? Or can you count on what he has done from Scripture? Can you count on what he has done in your life to this point today and point back to that and say, God, I remember. God, I believe that you will be faithful to me through this current trial that I'm going through, because you have a history of being faithful. Can you count on him? Or are you just looking for a show? Do you believe he is your bread of life? Or is Jesus a food truck with a menu on it filled with stuff that you're not really interested in today? Is he your all? Let's pray. Father, thank you so much that you give us the opportunity to be more than the crowd, more than a group of people who just come expecting more. Give me what I want. Let me have what I want right now, or I'm gone. We can be so much more than that in you. We can be satisfied in you. You promise us in John chapter 6 that you are the bread of life. Anyone who comes to you and eats will no longer be hungry. Help us to be satisfied in you. Help us to learn what it means to be in need. Help us to learn what it is to have plenty, but in all those situations, to have you. To know that you are the prize. Help us not to be like little children who are just looking for what we can get from you each day. Help us to be satisfied in who you are. And let our lives revolve around you, our bread of life. Help us not to get distracted with the things that this world has to offer. Help us not to get caught up in the anxiety of wanting more, while we can sit at your feet in total satisfaction, just the way John the Baptist had to in prison. He wasn't eating steak every night. He probably was eating gruel, Father. But you sustained him because he knew that Jesus was his bread of life. Help us to be people who are satisfied with you this week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you so much for joining us here this week. We have an incredible guest speaker you're not going to want to miss with us next week. So I will see you at the door, and thanks for coming.